The lawyer's office smelled like old books and fresh coffee, a strange combination that somehow fit the gravity of what was about to unfold. I sat across from Mr. Harrison, my hands steady despite everything, watching as he prepared to read the final words I would ever speak to my daughter. The mahogany desk between us held a thick manila envelope, sealed and waiting. 23 people had gathered in the conference room next door, most of them expecting to hear their names called, expecting pieces of the life I had carefully built over 7 decades. But there was only one person I was thinking about as the clock ticked toward 3 o'clock. Only one person whose face I could picture, whose shock I could almost taste. Cassandra had arrived 30 minutes early, I was told. She wore her best black dress, the designer one I had bought her for her college graduation, and she carried herself with that familiar confidence that had once made me so proud. She probably spent the morning calculating numbers, planning how she would spend her inheritance, maybe even picking out real estate listings for the bigger house she had always wanted. She had no idea that in the next few minutes her entire world would shift beneath her feet like sand giving way to the tide. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 months ago, she had left me sitting in a cold oncology waiting room, alone and terrified, choosing a weekend in Miami over being there when I needed her. She thought I would always be there, that mothers were inexhaustible wells of forgiveness and second chances. She was wrong. The document Mr. Harrison held in his hands would teach her something I should have taught her years ago. Actions have consequences, and some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. I closed my eyes and felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. This was about a daughter learning finally what it meant to be truly alone. My name is Dorothy Nelson, though everyone who loved me called me Dottie. I spent 71 years building a life that I thought would matter, brick by careful brick, sacrifice by quiet sacrifice. Looking back now, from the other side of betrayal and heartbreak, I can see how naive I was to believe that love alone could guarantee loyalty, that being a good mother would automatically create a good daughter. I was 22 when Cassandra came into the world, screaming and red-faced and absolutely perfect. Her father, Michael, had died in a construction accident just 2 months before she was born, leaving me with nothing but a small life insurance policy and a determination to give my daughter everything I never had. I held her in that hospital room, just the two of us against the world, and promised her that she would never want for anything. I promised her that I would be the mother mine never was, present and devoted and endlessly supportive. Those early years were hard in ways I never let Cassandra see. I worked double shifts at the textile factory during the week and cleaned offices on weekends, saving every penny I could for her future. While other single mothers struggled to make ends meet, I made sure Cassandra had piano lessons and summer camps and brand-name clothes that made her fit in with the kids whose parents had college degrees and 2-story houses. I wanted her to have opportunities, to dream bigger than the small town of Millbrook where we lived. Our little apartment on Elm Street wasn't much to look at from the outside, but inside, it was filled with love and laughter, and the sound of Cassandra practicing scales on the secondhand piano I had bought her for her 8th birthday. I remember coming home from work, exhausted and aching, and hearing those tentative notes floating down the hallway. No matter how tired I was, that sound would fill me with purpose. Every blister on my hands, every missed meal, every night I fell asleep at the kitchen table doing bookkeeping for extra money. It was all worth it to give her a chance at something better. Cassandra was bright, brighter than anyone expected from a girl whose mother never finished high school. She devoured books the way other children devoured candy, and she had questions about everything. Why was the sky blue? How did airplanes stay up? What made flowers grow? I didn't always have the answers, but I made sure she had access to people who did. I drove her to the library every Saturday morning, rain or shine, and watched her disappear into the stacks like she was entering a magic kingdom. When she was 10, her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, pulled me aside after a parent conference and told me that Cassandra was gifted, that she should be in advanced classes, that she had the potential to go to college. College. The word hung in the eye. Air between us like a promise and a challenge. I had never known anyone who went to college. In my family, you graduated high school if you were lucky, got married, and started having babies. But Mrs. Patterson looked at me with such conviction, such certainty that my daughter could be something more, that I believed her. From that moment on, college became our shared dream. I started a separate savings account, hiding $20 here and there whenever I could manage it. I bought Cassandra study guides and SAT prep books, driving her to test prep classes in the next town over, even though gas money was tight. I attended every parent-teacher conference, every science fair, every awards ceremony. I was the mother in the front row, beaming with pride, taking pictures with the disposable camera I kept in my purse for special occasions. High school brought new challenges. Cassandra's friends lived in the nice neighborhoods across town, and I could see her growing embarrassed by our modest circumstances. She started asking to be dropped off a block away from school events, claiming she liked the walk. She stopped inviting friends over, making excuses about our apartment being too small or too loud. It stung, but I understood. Teenagers need to fit in, to feel like they belong. I told myself it was a phase, that she would appreciate everything I had done for her once she was older. The college acceptance letters started arriving in the spring of her senior year, state schools mostly, with one or two private colleges that I knew we couldn't afford. But then, the envelope from Richmond University arrived, thick and promising, and inside was not just an acceptance letter but a partial scholarship. It wasn't enough to cover everything, but combined with the savings I had accumulated over the years and a modest student loan, we could make it work. I cried that night, sitting alone in the kitchen after Cassandra had gone to bed. They were tears of joy and relief, and something else I couldn't quite name. Pride, maybe, or vindication. All those years of sacrifice, all those nights I had wondered. If I was doing enough, if I was giving her what she needed, it had worked. My daughter was going to college. She was going to have the life I had always dreamed of for her. The summer before she left was bittersweet. Part of me was excited for her, proud of how far she had come, eager to see her spread her wings. But another part of me was terrified. For 18 years, she had been the center of my universe, the reason I got up every morning, the purpose that drove every decision I made. What would I do with myself when she was gone? We spent her last night at home going through old photo albums, remembering birthday parties and Christmas mornings and family vacations to the lake. She seemed different that night, softer somehow, more like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Thank you, Mom," she said as we closed the last album. "For everything. I know it wasn't easy." I hugged her tight, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, trying to memorize the moment. "It was the easiest thing I ever did," I told her, and I meant it. Loving you, supporting you, it never felt like work. It felt like privilege. The drive to Richmond University was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. When we arrived at her dormitory, I helped her carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs, arranging her belongings in the small room she would share with a girl from Virginia Beach. Her roommate seemed nice, chatty, and friendly, and I could see Cassandra already beginning to relax, to settle into this new chapter of her life. When it was time for me to leave, we stood awkwardly in the parking lot, neither of us quite knowing how to say goodbye. "Call me," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "And don't forget to eat. The dining hall food isn't going to be like home cooking." She rolled her eyes in that affectionate way she had perfected. I'll be fine, Mom. Stop worrying. But I did worry. I worried as I drove the 3 hours back to Millbrook, and I worried in the weeks that followed as her phone calls became less frequent and shorter when they did come. I worried when she didn't come home for her first fall break, choosing instead to stay at school for some social event I didn't quite understand. I worried when she changed her major from education to business, abandoning her childhood dream of becoming a teacher, without really explaining why. College changed her in ways I hadn't expected. She came home for Christmas junior year wearing clothes I knew she couldn't afford on her part-time job at the campus bookstore. Her hair was professionally styled, her nails perfectly manicured, and she spoke differently. Not just the vocabulary, but the tone, the inflection. She sounded like the girls from the nice side of town, the ones whose mothers drove luxury cars and belonged to country clubs. "Where did you get that sweater?" I asked, admiring the soft cashmere cardigan she wore to Christmas Eve service. "Oh, this?" She touched it absently. "My friend Emma gave it to me. She was cleaning out her closet." I nodded, but something about the way she said it made me wonder. Emma was her roommate, the girl from Virginia Beach whose father owned a chain of restaurants along the coast. Cassandra talked about Emma's family often, their beach house, their boat, their trips to Europe. I was grateful she had found such a good friend, but I couldn't shake the feeling that these stories highlighted everything Cassandra felt she was missing. After graduation, she took a job at a marketing firm in Richmond, a good job with a good salary and benefits. She moved into an apartment in a trendy neighborhood, the kind of place with exposed brick walls and industrial fixtures that young professionals found fashionable. When I visited, I marveled at how grown-up she seemed, how confident and self-assured. She wore business suits and carried a briefcase, and she spoke knowledgeably about things I didn't understand: market research and brand positioning and client retention strategies. "I'm proud of you," I told her over dinner at a restaurant she had chosen, the kind of place where the menu didn't have prices and the waiters wore black aprons. "You've accomplished so much." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thanks, Mom. I learned from the best." The years that followed established a pattern that I told myself was normal for adult children and their parents. We talked on the phone every few weeks, exchanged birthday and Christmas gifts, and she visited Millbrook maybe twice a year for major holidays. She was busy building her career, dating occasionally, creating the life she wanted. I was proud of her independence, even as I missed the closeness we had once shared. I filled my own life with work and community activities, volunteering at the local animal shelter and joining a book club that met at the library where I had once taken Cassandra every Saturday. I made friends with women my own age, women who understood the particular loneliness of empty nest syndrome and the pride that came with watching your children succeed. We compared stories of adult children who were too busy to call, too important to visit, too sophisticated for the small-town life we still called home. When I turned 65, I decided to retire from the factory where I had worked for over 40 years. The company threw me a small party, and the supervisor I had worked under for the last decade gave a speech about my dedication and reliability. Cassandra sent flowers and called to congratulate me, but she didn't come to the party. She was launching a new campaign for a major client, she explained, and she couldn't get away from work. Retirement was an adjustment. After decades of structure and routine, I suddenly had endless days to fill. I took up gardening, transforming the small patch of dirt behind my apartment into a riot of color and life. I learned to use a computer, setting up email so Cassandra and I could stay in touch more easily. I started taking long walks around Millbrook, rediscovering corners of my hometown I had been too busy to notice while I was working. The walks became my favorite part of the day. I would set out after breakfast, when the morning air was still cool and the light fell soft and golden across the familiar streets. I walked past the elementary school where Cassandra had learned to read, past the park where she had played on the swings, past the library where we had spent so many Saturday mornings lost in books and dreams. These walks became a form of meditation, a way of connecting with the memories that had shaped both of us. It was on one of these walks that I noticed the lump. I was adjusting my sweater, pulling it closer against an unexpected chill, when my hand brushed against something that shouldn't have been there. A small, hard mass just below my collarbone, hidden beneath the soft fabric of my blouse. My fingers explored it carefully, hoping it was just a swollen lymph node or a muscle knot, something harmless and temporary. But even as I tried to rationalize it away, a cold fear settled in my stomach. I waited a week before calling Dr. Martinez, my family physician. I told myself I was being silly, that it was probably nothing, that women my age worried about every little change in their bodies. But the lump didn't go away, and if anything, it seemed to be getting larger. Dr. Martinez examined me with gentle professional hands, his face carefully neutral as he felt the mass that had been keeping me awake at night. "I want to send you for some tests," he said, his voice kind but serious. "Just to be safe." Thigh. Tests led to more tests, which led to a biopsy, which led to the words no one ever wants to hear. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Nelson, but it's cancer. Breast cancer, stage 2, aggressive but treatable. Doctor." Martinez referred me to an oncologist in Richmond, Dr. Sarah Chen, a woman about Cassandra's age with steady hands and a gentle manner. Dr. Chen explained the treatment plan, surgery followed by chemotherapy, a months-long journey that would be difficult but offered good prospects for recovery. "Do you have family support?" she asked during our first consultation. Treatment can be physically and emotionally challenging. It helps to have people around you. "I have a daughter," I said automatically. "She lives here in Richmond." I called Cassandra that evening, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. How do you tell your child that you have cancer? How do you find the words for something so big, so frightening, so potentially life-altering? "Mom." Her voice was rushed, distracted. I could hear traffic in the background, the sounds of the city that had become her home. "Is everything okay? I'm just leaving the office." "Cassie," I said, using the nickname I hadn't called her in years. "I need to tell you something. I went to the doctor and I have breast cancer." Silence stretched between us, long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then I heard her intake of breath, sharp and sudden. "Oh, Mom. Oh, no. Are you? How bad is it?" I explained what Dr. Chen had told me about the treatment plan and the prognosis and the surgery that was scheduled for the following month. As I talked, I could hear her moving, the sound of a car door closing, the engine starting. "I'll be there," she said immediately. "For the surgery. I'll take time off work and drive up to Millbrook." "Actually," I said carefully, "the surgery is here in Richmond, at VCU Medical Center. Dr. Chen thinks it's the best place for my particular case." "Oh." Another pause. "Well, that's actually better, more convenient. I can be there every day." The relief in her voice was obvious, and I understood why. Richmond was her territory, her comfort zone. She wouldn't have to take days off work to drive back and forth to Millbrook. She could continue her normal routine while still being supportive. It made sense, I told myself. It was practical. The surgery went well, according to Dr. Chen. She had been able to remove the entire tumor with clean margins, and the lymph nodes showed no sign of spread. The recovery would take several weeks, followed by 4 months of chemotherapy treatments every 3 weeks. It was a long road ahead, but the prognosis was good. Cassandra visited me in the hospital the day after surgery, bringing flowers and a gift basket filled with magazines and herbal tea. She looked professional and put together, her work clothes slightly out of place in the sterile hospital environment. We talked for about an hour, mostly about practical things, how I was feeling, what the doctors had said, when I would be able to go home. "The chemo starts in 3 weeks, I told her as she prepared to leave. Dr. Chen says the treatments take most of the day, and I might feel pretty sick afterward. "You'll get through it," she said, squeezing my hand. "You're the strongest person I know." I wanted to ask her to be there for the treatments, to sit with me during the long hours in the infusion center, to drive me home when I was too weak and nauseous to drive myself. But something in her manner, professional and slightly distant, made me hesitate. She had already done so much, I told myself. She had a demanding job, a busy life. I couldn't expect her to put everything on hold for me. The first chemotherapy treatment was scheduled for a Thursday morning in March. I drove myself to Richmond the night before, staying in a budget hotel near the medical center so I wouldn't have to make the trip early in the morning. The infusion center was a cheerful place, all soft colors and comfortable recliners, designed to make an unpleasant experience as bearable as possible. The nurses were kind and efficient, inserting the IV with practiced ease and explaining each medication as it dripped into my bloodstream. "This one might make you feel a little nauseous," one of them said, adjusting the flow rate. "And this one sometimes causes tingling in your fingers and toes." The treatment took 6 hours, during which I tried to read a book but found it difficult to concentrate. Other patients around me had family members with them, spouses who held their hands during the worst moments, adult children who brought crossword puzzles and homemade sandwiches, friends who sat quietly providing comfort through their simple presence. I was alone. Cassandra had texted that morning to wish me luck and ask me to let her know how it went. She was in meetings all day, she explained, but she would call me that evening to check in. I understood. I had raised her to be ambitious, to take her career seriously, to never let personal issues interfere with professional responsibilities. I was proud of her dedication, even as I sat alone in that recliner, watching poison drip into my veins and hoping it would save my life. The pattern continued through the subsequent treatments. I would drive myself to Richmond, check into the same budget hotel, spend the day in the infusion center, and drive home to Millbrook the next morning when I felt well enough to make the trip. Cassandra would text or call to check on me, but she was always busy with work, always in the middle of some important project or client crisis. By the third treatment, the side effects were becoming more severe. The nausea was constant and overwhelming, and I had lost most of my hair despite the cold cap treatments that were supposed to prevent it. Food tasted like metal, and I was losing weight at an alarming rate. Dr. Chen was concerned about my support system, or lack thereof. "Mrs. Nelson," she said during one of our appointments, "I'm worried about you doing this alone. Chemotherapy is a team sport. You need people around you." "My daughter checks on me," I said defensively. "That's good, but what about during treatments? Who drives you home? Who takes care of you when you're sick?" I didn't have an answer for that. The truth was, I had been managing everything myself. Grocery shopping between treatments when I felt well enough, doing laundry and cleaning when the fatigue wasn't too overwhelming, sleeping alone in my apartment when the nausea kept me awake all night. It was during the fourth treatment that I finally broke down and asked Cassandra directly for help. "I was wondering," I said during one of our phone conversations, "if you might be able to come with me to my next treatment. It's a Thursday and I know you're busy, but—" "Oh, Mom." Her voice was full of genuine regret. "This Thursday? I can't. We're presenting the Henderson campaign to the client, and I'm the lead on the account. It's huge for my career. Can't." "You reschedule? The treatments have to be exactly 3 weeks apart," I explained. "Dr. Chen says the timing is crucial for effectiveness." "Right, of course. I'm sorry. Maybe the one after that?" But there was always something. The Henderson presentation led to a follow-up meeting, which led to a conference in Atlanta, which led to a new client pitch that couldn't be postponed. Each time I asked, Cassandra had a reasonable excuse, a legitimate work obligation that took precedence over sitting with her mother in a cancer treatment center. I stopped asking. The loneliness was almost worse than the cancer itself. I sat in that infusion center month after month, watching other patients laugh with their families, hold hands with their spouses, share quiet conversations with their adult children, I saw grandmothers being comforted by their grandkids, husbands bringing homemade soup to their wives, friends who had organized schedules so someone was always there to provide support, and I was alone. I started bringing books I couldn't concentrate on and magazines I couldn't read, anything to avoid making eye contact with the families around me. I developed relationships with the nurses, who began to recognize me and ask about my week, my appetite, my energy levels. They became the closest thing I had to a support system. These kind professionals who saw dozens of patients every day but still remembered that I liked ginger ale with my crackers and that the purple blanket was my favorite. After my sixth and final treatment, Dr. Chen delivered the news I had been praying for. The cancer was gone. The scans were clear, the blood work was normal, and I was officially in remission. I should have been celebrating, calling everyone I knew to share the good news. Instead, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot and cried. Not tears of joy, though there were some of those. Mostly tears of exhaustion and relief and a deep, aching sadness that I had gone through the most frightening experience of my life essentially alone. The daughter I had sacrificed everything for, the child I had loved more than my own life, had been too busy to sit with me while I fought for that life. I called Cassandra from the car, my voice still thick with tears. Mom, how did it go? What? Did Dr. Chen say? It's over, I said. The cancer is gone. I'm in remission. Oh my God, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you. You did it. Her enthusiasm felt genuine, and for a moment, I allowed myself to bask in it. Maybe this would change things between us. Maybe surviving cancer would remind us both of what was really important. I was thinking, I said carefully, maybe we could celebrate. Have dinner this weekend? I could drive down to Richmond, or you could come up to Millbrook. Absolutely. Let me check my calendar and get back to you. But when she called back the next day, there was a problem. She had forgotten about a work retreat that weekend, a team-building exercise at a resort in the mountains that was mandatory for all department heads. She couldn't get out of it, she explained, but maybe the following weekend. The following weekend, she had a friend's wedding. The weekend after that, she was launching a new campaign and had to work. There was always something, always a reason why celebrating my survival had to be postponed. Eventually, I stopped suggesting it. The months that followed my recovery were a strange time of reflection and reassessment. I was alive, cancer-free, and supposedly ready to return to normal life. But what was normal? For 6 months, my entire existence had revolved around treatments and appointments and the simple goal of survival. Now that I had achieved that goal, I wasn't sure what came next. I returned to my routines, the long walks around Millbrook, the book club meetings, the volunteer work at the animal shelter. But everything felt different, colored by the knowledge of how quickly life could change, how fragile the connections were that I had always taken for granted. My relationship with Cassandra settled into a new pattern that felt even more distant than before. She called dutifully every few weeks, asking about my health and my activities with the kind of polite interest she might show a casual acquaintance. When I tried to talk about my experience with cancer, about how frightening it had been, or how lonely I had felt, she would quickly change the subject or offer platitudes about how strong I was, how proud she was that I had gotten through it. It was as if the cancer had never happened, as if those 6 months of fear and pain and isolation were something we had agreed to pretend away. I began to understand that Cassandra felt guilty about her absence during my treatment, but instead of acknowledging that guilt or trying to make amends, she had chosen to act as if it had never occurred. I might have accepted this new normal, might have convinced myself that it was enough to have my daughter alive and healthy and successful. Even if she was emotionally unavailable, I might have spent the rest of my life making excuses for her, the way I had been doing for years. But then came the weekend that changed everything. The phone call came on a Friday evening in late September, just as the leaves were beginning to turn and I was settling into the quiet rhythm of my post-cancer life. I was in my kitchen, preparing a simple dinner of soup and crackers, when the phone rang with that particular urgency that makes your heart skip a beat before you even answer. "Mom?" Cassandra's voice was breathless, excited in a way I hadn't heard in years. "Are you sitting down? I have incredible news." I lowered myself into one of the kitchen chairs, cradling the cordless phone against my ear. "What is it, sweetheart?" "I got promoted. Senior Vice President of Client Relations. Can you believe it? The youngest SVP in the company's history." The pride in her voice was infectious, and I found myself smiling despite the distance that had grown between us. "Oh, Cassie, that's wonderful. I'm so proud of you." "There's more," she continued, words tumbling over each other in her excitement. "They're sending me to Miami for a week-long conference. It's this huge networking event with clients from all over the Southeast. David, he's the CEO, said this could position me for regional director within the next 2 years." I listened. As she described the conference, the luxury resort where it would be held, the important people she would meet. Her enthusiasm was genuine and contagious, reminding me of the little girl who used to run to me with straight-A report cards and science fair ribbons. "When is this conference?" I asked, already planning how we might celebrate her promotion when she returned. "Next weekend, Friday through Sunday. I know it's short notice, but David just told me this afternoon. Apparently someone else was supposed to go, but they had a family emergency." Next weekend. Something about those words sent a small chill down my spine, though I couldn't immediately place why. "That sounds like an amazing opportunity," I said, meaning it. "I know, right? This is exactly the kind of break I've been working toward for years. I can't believe it's finally happening." We talked for another 20 minutes, and for those precious moments, it felt like we were close again. She told me about her new office with the corner windows, about the team she would be managing, about the salary increase that came with the promotion. I shared her joy genuinely, remembering all the nights I had worked extra shifts to pay for her education, all the sacrifices that had led to this moment. It wasn't until after we hung up that the unease settled in my stomach like a stone. Next weekend. Why did that feel significant? I walked over to the small calendar I kept tacked to the refrigerator, the one where I marked doctor's appointments and book club meetings in my careful handwriting. My finger traced across the dates until it landed on the following Friday, and then I saw it, written in red ink, underlined twice. Follow-up appointment with Dr. Chen, 2 p.m. My 6-month cancer screening. The appointment I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure, the one that would determine whether the cancer had returned, whether the nightmare of chemotherapy and fear would begin all over again. I had mentioned it to Cassandra just 2 weeks earlier during one of our phone calls, explaining how nervous I was, how much this appointment meant to my peace of mind. She had forgotten. Or maybe she hadn't forgotten. Maybe she had simply decided that her conference, her career advancement, her networking opportunities were more important than sitting with her mother while they scanned her body for signs of returning cancer. I stood in my kitchen, staring at that red ink on the calendar, feeling something shift inside me like tectonic plates finding a new alignment. This wasn't just about a missed appointment. This was about priorities. This was about what mattered when everything else was stripped away. The next morning, I called Dr. Chen's office to confirm my appointment, listening to the cheerful receptionist recite the pre-appointment instructions I had memorized during my previous battle with cancer. No caffeine 12 hours before the eye scans. Arrive 30 minutes early for paperwork. Bring a list of current medications. Bring someone to drive you home if you're feeling anxious about the results. Bring someone to drive you home. I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my apartment, surrounded by the life I had built for myself in the aftermath of survival. The walls were decorated with photographs spanning 7 decades. My parents, long dead, Michael in his construction, uniform, Cassandra at various stages of her childhood and young adulthood. There were pictures of her high school graduation, her college commencement, the day she moved into her first apartment in Richmond. In every photo, my face glowed with pride and love for this child who had been the center of my universe for so long. But there were no recent pictures, no photos of us together from the past few years, no images of the woman she had become, too busy and important to make time for the mother who had given her everything. I tried to rationalize her absence. The conference really was important for her career. She had worked hard for this promotion, had earned this opportunity through years of dedication and long hours. I should be supportive, I told myself. I should understand that sometimes professional obligations have to take precedence over personal ones. But no matter how many excuses I made for her, I couldn't escape the simple truth. My daughter would rather network with strangers at a luxury resort than sit with me while I found out if cancer was trying to kill me again. The week passed slowly, each day bringing me closer to the appointment I would face alone. I went through the motions of my normal routine, the morning walks, the grocery shopping, the volunteer hours at the animal shelter, but everything felt muted, as if I were experiencing life through heavy glass. On Wednesday, Cassandra called to talk more about the conference. She had bought new clothes for the networking events, she told me. Professional but stylish outfits that would help her make the right impression. She described the resort in detail, the ocean views, the championship golf course, the spa where she planned to unwind after the meetings. "It sounds lovely," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "I know I'll be busy the whole time, but I'm planning to take advantage of the spa on Sunday before I fly home. I've been so stressed with the new position, and David said we should treat this as a combination of work and reward." A combination of work and reward. While I sat in an oncology waiting room, wondering if my life would be measured in months or years. "Mom, are you there?" "I'm here," I said, "just thinking about how proud I am of you. You've accomplished so much." "Thanks, Mom. That means everything to me. You know that, right? Your support has been the foundation of everything I've achieved." The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. My support had indeed been the foundation of her achievements. Financial support when she needed tuition money, emotional support when she doubted herself, unwavering belief in her potential when others saw only a factory worker's daughter with big dreams. But now, when I needed support, when I needed someone to believe in my strength and hold my hand while I faced my fears, she was nowhere to be found. "I know, sweetheart," I said, because what else was there to say? Thursday evening arrived with unusual warmth for late September, and I spent the time preparing for the next day's appointment with the same ritual precision I had developed during my cancer treatment. I laid out comfortable clothes, prepared a small bag with water and crackers in case the anxiety made me nauseous, and set 2 alarms to ensure I wouldn't oversleep. As I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed with a text message from Cassandra. "Flying out early tomorrow morning. Wish me luck at the conference. Love you." I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard as I composed and deleted a dozen different responses. I could tell her about my appointment, remind her what tomorrow meant for me, ask her to call me after my results. I could guilt her into acknowledging that she was choosing a work conference over her mother's health scare. Instead, I typed back, "Good luck, sweetheart. I love you too." Because that's what mothers do. We protect our children from the consequences of their own selfishness, even when that protection enables them to hurt us more deeply. Friday morning dawned gray and overcast, the kind of weather that seems to press down on your shoulders like a physical weight. I dressed carefully in the soft blue sweater Cassandra had given me for Christmas 2 years ago, thinking perhaps it would bring me luck, or at least comfort. The drive to Richmond felt longer than usual, each mile stretching out like an eternity as I rehearsed conversations with Dr. Chen in my head. The medical center parking garage was busier than I expected for a Friday afternoon, and I had to circle 3 levels before finding a space. As I walked toward the elevator, I passed families heading to various appointments, a young couple with their hands intertwined, an elderly man being wheeled by what appeared to be his son, a middle-aged woman accompanied by two friends who flanked her like protective bookends. Everyone had someone, everyone except me. The oncology waiting room had been redecorated since my last visit 6 months ago. The walls were now painted a cheerful yellow instead of institutional beige, and there were new motivational posters featuring sunrises and mountain landscapes with inspirational quotes about strength and perseverance. I checked in with the receptionist, a different woman than I remembered, and took a seat in the corner where I could observe the room without feeling too exposed. The other patients waiting for their appointments were a mix of ages and stages. There was a woman about my age with her husband, both of them reading magazines but occasionally reaching for each other's hands. A younger man, maybe in his 40s, sat with his teenage daughter, who was doing homework while keeping one eye on her father. An elderly gentleman dozed in his chair while his wife knitted what looked like a baby blanket, her needles clicking rhythmically in the quiet room. I pulled out the book I had brought, a mystery novel I had been meaning to read for months, but found it impossible to concentrate on the words. My mind kept wandering to Cassandra, who was probably sitting in first class at that moment, reviewing her conference materials and planning her strategy for the networking events. I wondered if she had thought about me at all since boarding her flight, if she remembered what day this was and what it meant for both of us. Dorothy Nelson? A nurse in cheerful scrubs called my name, and I followed her down the familiar hallway to the examination room where Dr. Chen was waiting. Dr. Chen looked exactly the same as she had 6 months ago, professional, competent, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She greeted me warmly and asked about my general health, my energy levels, any concerns I might have noticed since my last visit. We went through the routine questions with practiced efficiency, both of us knowing that the real answers would come from the scans I was about to undergo. "Any family here with you today?" she asked as she made notes in my chart. "No," I said simply. "My daughter had a work obligation." Dr. Chen nodded without judgment, but I caught something in her expression, a flicker of sympathy perhaps, or recognition of a pattern she had seen too many times before. How many cancer patients, I wondered, faced their follow-up appointments alone, while their loved ones attended to more pressing matters? The scans themselves were routine but nerve-wracking. I lay still in the machine while it hummed and clicked around me, trying to think positive thoughts and visualize healthy cells and clear images. The technician was professional but distant, offering no hints about what she might be seeing on the screen that monitored my body's interior landscape. Afterward, I returned to Dr. Chen's office to wait for the results. This was always the worst part. The liminal space between not knowing and knowing, between hope and fear, between life continuing as normal and life irrevocably changing direction. "The scans look good," Dr. Chen said when she returned 20 minutes later, and I felt the breath I hadn't realized I was holding escape in a rush. "No signs of recurrence. Your blood work is excellent. I'm very pleased with how you're doing." Relief flooded through me like warm water, washing away weeks of accumulated anxiety. "So, I'm okay? Really okay?" "You're doing beautifully," she confirmed. "I'd like to see you again in 6 months for another follow-up, but as far as I'm concerned, you can consider yourself a cancer survivor, not a cancer patient." A cancer survivor. The words felt foreign and wonderful in my mouth, like a language I was just learning to speak. I was going to live. The cancer hadn't returned. I had more time, more years, more opportunities to build a life worth living. As I walked back through the waiting room, past the other patients and their families, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Joy and relief, certainly, but also a profound sadness that this moment, one of the most important of my life, was unwitnessed by the person who mattered most to me. In the parking garage, I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Cassandra's number, my finger hovering over the call button. I wanted to share this news with her, Wanted to hear her voice expressing relief and joy that her mother would be around for many more years. But I also wanted her to remember what today was without being reminded. I wanted her to call me, to ask about the appointment, to show that my health and well-being were important enough to interrupt her conference schedule. My phone remained silent. I drove home to Millbrook in a strange state of emotional suspension. The good news about my health should have overshadowed everything else, should have sent me home singing and celebrating and calling everyone I knew. Instead, I felt hollow, as if the relief had carved out a space inside me that I didn't know how to fill. That evening, I made myself a simple dinner and ate it while watching the sunset from my kitchen window. The sky was spectacular, layers of orange and pink and deep purple that made the whole world look like it was on fire. It was the kind of sunset that demanded to be shared, that felt too beautiful to experience alone. But I was alone. At 8:00, my phone finally rang. Cassandra's number appeared on the screen, and I answered it with a mixture of hope and resentment that I tried to keep out of my voice. "Hi, Mom. How was your day?" How was my day? As if it had been any ordinary Friday, as if I hadn't spent the afternoon finding out whether I was going to live or die. "It was fine," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "How's the conference?" "Oh my God, it's incredible. The resort is absolutely gorgeous, and I've already made 3 really promising connections. David introduced me to the regional VP from our Atlanta office, and she basically offered me a position on the spot if I ever want to relocate." She talked for 15 minutes about the conference, the luxury accommodations, the impressive attendee list, the opportunities that were presenting themselves. Her excitement was genuine and infectious, and I found myself genuinely happy for her success, even as my heart broke a little more with each passing minute. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," I said when she finally paused for breath. "I'm so proud of you." "Thanks, Mom. Oh, and get this. They have a chocolate fountain at the dessert station, an actual chocolate fountain. I took a picture to show you when I get back. A chocolate fountain, while I had been lying in a scanning machine. Wondering if cancer cells were multiplying in my body, my daughter had been marveling at dessert arrangements. "Mom, you're being kind of quiet. Is everything okay?" This was my moment. I could tell her about the appointment, about the scans, about the relief I felt at being declared cancer-free. I could explain how frightening it had been to face that, alone. How much it would have meant to have her there. Instead, I heard myself saying, "I'm just tired. It's been a long day." "Oh, okay. Well, I should probably get going anyway. We have an early networking breakfast tomorrow, and I want to review my talking points one more time." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and tried to understand what had just happened. Why hadn't I told her about the appointment? Why had I protected her from knowing that she had missed one of the most important days of my life? The answer came to me slowly, like dawn breaking over a landscape I had never seen before. I hadn't told her because I already knew how she would react. She would apologize, of course, with genuine regret and perhaps some tears. She would explain about the conference, about how she couldn't have left, about how her career was at such a crucial juncture. She would promise to do better next time, to be more attentive, to prioritize our relationship over her professional obligations. And then, the next time something important happened in my life, she would find another reason to be absent, another excuse that seemed reasonable and justified. Because the truth was, Cassandra had learned to take my presence in her life for granted. She assumed I would always be there, always be understanding, always forgive her for putting other things first. She had no idea how much it cost me to be that understanding, that forgiving, that endlessly available for the scraps of attention she threw my way. The weekend passed quietly. I worked in my small garden, harvesting the last of the summer tomatoes and preparing the beds for winter. I cleaned my apartment thoroughly, The kind of deep cleaning that involves moving furniture and washing baseboards. Anything to keep my hands busy and my mind occupied. I baked a batch of oatmeal cookies using my mother's recipe, then realized I had no one to share them with. Sunday evening brought another call from Cassandra, this one from the resort spa where she was enjoying a massage and facial before her flight home the next morning. "I feel like a completely new person," she said, her voice languid and relaxed. "This weekend has been exactly what I needed. I feel recharged and ready to take on the new position." "I'm glad you had a good time," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I wanted my daughter to be happy, to feel successful and fulfilled. "How was your weekend, Mom? Did you do anything fun?" Anything fun? I thought about the long hours I had spent alone, processing the news of my clean scans, celebrating my continued survival in the solitude of my small apartment. "It was quiet," I said. "Peaceful." "That sounds nice. You deserve some relaxation, after everything you've been through." Everything I've been through. The phrase hung in the air between us, acknowledgement without specificity, sympathy without understanding. After the call ended, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pen. I started to write, not a letter exactly, but a list of all the moments when I had needed Cassandra and she had chosen to be elsewhere. The cancer diagnosis she had received over the phone while rushing to a meeting. The chemotherapy treatments I had endured alone while she attended work conferences and client dinners. The follow-up appointment she had missed while networking at a luxury resort. The list was longer than I expected, stretching across 2 pages in my careful handwriting. Each item represented a choice she had made, a priority she had established, a message she had sent about what mattered most in her life. As I read through the list, I felt something crystallize inside me, hard and clear and surprisingly liberating. I had spent decades making excuses for my daughter, justifying her absence, accepting her apologies and promises to do better. I had convinced myself that her love for me was demonstrated through her success, that her achievements were tribute enough to all the sacrifices I had made. But love isn't just about gratitude for past sacrifices. Love is about showing up when it matters, about being present during the difficult moments, about choosing someone's well-being over your own convenience. And by that measure, my daughter didn't love me at all. The realization should have devastated me. Instead, it felt like taking off a coat I had been wearing for so long that I had forgotten how heavy it was. For the first time in years, I could see my relationship with Cassandra clearly, without the distortion of hope and denial and maternal obligation. I folded the list carefully and tucked it into the drawer where I kept important documents: insurance, papers, medical records, the deed to my small life insurance policy. Someday, I thought, someone might find it and understand the choices I was beginning to contemplate. The next few weeks brought a subtle shift in my daily routine. I stopped making excuses for Cassandra when friends asked about her visits. When the ladies in my book club wondered aloud why she hadn't been around lately, I simply said she was busy with work and left it at that. I stopped suggesting we get together for dinner or spend weekends together, stopped initiating plans that would inevitably be canceled or postponed. Instead, I focused on building a life that didn't revolve around her approval or presence. I signed up for a watercolor painting class at the community center, something I had always wanted to try but never had time for during the years when her needs came first. I joined a hiking group for seniors, discovering muscles I had forgotten. I possessed as we explored trails through the state parks around Millbrook. I made new friends, women like myself who had raised children and supported families and were now learning to prioritize their own interests and desires. We talked about books and politics and gardening, about travel dreams and creative projects, and the strange freedom that came with reaching an age where other people's expectations mattered less than our own fulfillment. For the first time in decades, I was living for myself rather than for someone else's potential approval. Cassandra noticed the change, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what was different. Our phone conversations became shorter and more superficial, not because I was angry or resentful, but because I no longer felt the need to fill every silence with chatter about my daily activities or questions about her work. "You seem different lately," she said during one of our calls in early November. "More independent or something." "I'm just keeping busy," I replied, "enjoying my retirement." "That's good. I worry about you being alone up there so much." The comment struck me as particularly ironic, given that her choices had contributed significantly to that solitude. But I didn't point that out. I had moved beyond the need to make her feel guilty for her priorities. "I'm not really alone," I said truthfully. "I have friends, activities, interests. I'm building a good life for myself." "Oh, well, that's great, Mom. I'm glad you're staying active." She sounded slightly puzzled, as if my contentment without her was somehow unexpected. For years, she had been accustomed to being the bright center of my universe, the source of my pride and purpose. The idea that I might have found fulfillment elsewhere, that I might not need her approval or presence to feel complete, was apparently difficult for her to process. As Thanksgiving approached, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable just a few months earlier. Instead of automatically assuming I would spend the holiday alone or hoping Cassandra might find time to visit, I accepted an invitation from Margaret, one of my hiking companions, to join her extended family for dinner. "Are you sure?" Margaret asked when I said yes to her invitation. "I know how much family holidays mean to people. I don't want to intrude on your traditions." "With your daughter." "My daughter has her own life," I said simply, "and I'm ready to start building some new traditions." The dinner was lovely, a warm, chaotic gathering of 3 generations crowded around Margaret's dining room table, sharing stories and laughter, and the kind of easy affection that comes from showing up for each other consistently over time. I helped with the dishes afterward and played board games with Margaret's grandchildren, who treated me with the same casual fondness they showed their actual grandmother. Driving home that evening, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with being needed or appreciated by Cassandra. I had spent the day with people who chose to include me in their celebration, who welcomed my presence without obligation or guilt. It was a different kind of belonging, but it was real and warm and entirely my own. Cassandra called that night to check on me, as I had known she would. Thanksgiving was one of the holidays that activated her sense of filial duty, prompting her to reach out with concern about my well-being. "How was your day, Mom?" "I kept thinking about you. I'm sorry I couldn't make it up to Millbrook this year, but you know how crazy things have been with the new position." "I had a lovely day," I said honestly. "I spent it with friends. We had a wonderful time." "Oh." A pause. "That's nice. I'm glad you weren't alone." There was something in her voice. Surprise, perhaps, or maybe a hint of something that might have been jealousy. She had grown accustomed to being my primary source of social connection, the center around which my limited social world revolved. The idea that I might have found community elsewhere, that other people might have welcomed me into their family traditions, seemed to catch her off guard. "I've been making a lot of new friends lately," I continued. "There's a whole world of interesting people here in Millbrook that I never took time to get to know before." "That's wonderful, Mom. I'm happy for you." But she didn't sound entirely happy. She sounded uncertain, as if my independence was shifting something fundamental in our relationship dynamic that she wasn't prepared to navigate. December brought the first real snowfall of the winter, and with it, a strange sense of anticipation that I couldn't quite identify. I was content with my new routines, enjoying my painting classes and hiking adventures, but something felt unfinished, as if I were waiting for a conversation or a decision that hadn't yet arrived. The answer came in the form of a phone call from my lawyer, Robert Harrison, whom I had consulted years earlier when setting up my will and estate planning documents. "Mrs. Nelson," he said when I answered the phone on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, "I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. I wanted to touch base with you about your estate planning documents. It's been several years since we updated them, and I like to check in with my clients periodically to make sure everything still reflects their current wishes. Estate planning. The phrase sent a small chill through me, even though I knew it was simply practical preparation for an inevitable future. At 71, with a history of cancer, it was responsible to ensure my affairs were in order. That's very thoughtful of you to check in, I said. I think everything is probably still current, but maybe it would be wise to review things. Excellent. Would you like to schedule an appointment to go over your documents? We can make sure your beneficiaries are still accurate, discuss any changes you might want to make. Beneficiaries. Currently, Cassandra was the sole beneficiary of everything I owned: my modest savings account, the small life insurance policy I had maintained since her childhood, a few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to my mother, and the household possessions that represented a lifetime of careful accumulation. Yes, I heard myself saying. I think it's time to review everything carefully. We scheduled an appointment for the following week, and after hanging up, I sat in my quiet apartment and contemplated the conversation that lay ahead. For the first time in my life, I was going to make decisions about my legacy based on what I wanted rather than what was expected of me. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. That evening, I pulled out the list I had written after Cassandra's conference weekend, the catalog of all the times she had chosen other priorities over being present for me. I read through it again, not with anger or resentment, but with the clear-eyed assessment of someone taking inventory of a relationship that had been fundamentally unbalanced for far too long. I thought about the little girl who had once crawled into my bed during thunderstorms, who had brought me dandelions she had picked in the park, who had hugged me so tightly on her first day of kindergarten that I had to pry her arms from around my neck. Where had that child gone? When had she been replaced by this polite, distant woman who offered sympathy and apologies but never actual presence? The answer, I realized, was that I had enabled the transformation through my own endless forgiveness. My willingness to accept whatever attention she was willing to give. My failure to set boundaries or expectations that might have preserved the closeness between us. But it wasn't too late to set those boundaries. It wasn't too late to make choices that reflected my own worth, rather than my desperate need to maintain a connection that had long since become one-sided. I folded the list away and began to plan for my appointment with Robert Harrison, thinking carefully about what kind of legacy I wanted to leave behind. For the first time in decades, that legacy would be determined by my values rather than my daughter's expectations. The snow continued to fall outside my window, covering the familiar landscape of Millbrook in pristine white. Everything looked clean and new and full of possibility, as if the world itself was starting over. And perhaps, I thought, it was. The appointment with Robert Harrison took place on a crisp December morning when the world outside his office windows looked like a Christmas card. His law practice occupied the second floor of a renovated Victorian house on Main Street, with tall windows that let in streams of winter sunlight and walls lined with leather-bound legal volumes that spoke of tradition and permanence. Robert himself was a man in his early 60s with silver hair and the kind of gentle manner that put clients at ease during difficult conversations. He had handled my legal affairs for nearly 15 years, ever since I had first realized the importance of having my wishes documented and legally protected. Today, however, felt different from our previous meetings. Today, I wasn't simply updating routine paperwork. Today, I was reconsidering everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and what it meant to leave a meaningful legacy. "Thank you for coming in, Dorothy," Robert said as he settled behind his mahogany desk with my file spread before him. "I always appreciate clients who stay proactive about their estate planning. Too many people put these things off until it's too late to make thoughtful decisions." He opened my folder and began reviewing the documents we had prepared years earlier, when my primary concerns had been ensuring Cassandra's financial security and making the process as simple as possible for her to navigate after my death. The will was straightforward, everything to my daughter, with a few small bequests to charity organizations I supported. It was the kind of document that most single mothers create, born out of love, and the assumption that children naturally deserve to inherit their parents' life's work. Now then, Robert continued, adjusting his reading glasses, let's go through your current beneficiary designations and see if anything needs updating. I see that Cassandra is listed as your primary beneficiary for all assets, your savings accounts, the life insurance policy, personal property, everything. Yes, I said quietly. That's correct. And is that still your preference? No changes in your family situation that might affect your wishes? The question hung in the air between us like a bridge I could choose to cross or leave behind. This was my moment to either confirm the status quo or admit that something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of what my daughter deserved from me. Actually, I said slowly, I've been doing some thinking about that. About what it means to leave someone everything, and whether doing so is always the kindest or most meaningful choice. Robert set down his pen and gave me his full attention. He had probably heard similar statements from countless clients over the years. Parents grappling with complex relationships with their adult children, trying to balance love with accountability, generosity with wisdom. Would you like to tell me what's been on your mind? He asked gently. I took a deep breath and began to explain, choosing my words carefully. I told him about the cancer diagnosis and treatment, about the months of chemotherapy I had endured alone while Cassandra attended work functions and social events. I described the follow-up appointment she had missed while networking at a luxury resort, the pattern of absence that had become the defining characteristic of our relationship. I don't want to punish her, I said, hearing my own voice grow stronger as I spoke. But I also don't want to reward behavior that suggests my well-being and presence in her life are less important than her career advancement or social opportunities. I've spent so many years making excuses for her choices that I think I've enabled her to take me for granted. Robert nodded thoughtfully, his expression neither judgmental nor surprised. These are some of the most difficult decisions clients face, he said. The relationship between financial inheritance and emotional accountability is complex. There's no right or wrong answer, only what feels authentic to your values and experiences. We talked for over an hour about the various options available to me. I could reduce Cassandra's inheritance without eliminating it entirely. Perhaps, leaving her a modest amount while directing the majority of my assets elsewhere. I could create conditions that she would need to meet in order to inherit, though Robert cautioned that such arrangements could be complicated and emotionally fraught. Or I could choose to disinherit her completely, leaving my modest estate to organizations or causes that aligned with my values. There's something else to consider, Robert said as our conversation continued. The emotional impact of your decision won't just affect Cassandra. It will affect you too, during whatever time you have remaining. Are you prepared for the possibility that this choice might permanently alter your relationship with your daughter? The question struck me with unexpected force. Was I prepared for that possibility? Could I live with the knowledge that my decision might end whatever connection Cassandra and I still maintained? I think, I said slowly, that our relationship has already been altered permanently. The question is whether I'm going to continue pretending otherwise, or whether I'm going to make choices that reflect the reality of how she has chosen to treat me. Robert made notes as we talked, occasionally asking clarifying questions about my wishes and motivations. By the end of our meeting, we had outlined a new estate plan that would donate the majority of my assets to 3 organizations that had become important to me during my recovery: the Cancer Support Center, where I had found community during treatment, the animal shelter where I volunteered, and a scholarship fund for first-generation college students from working-class families. For Cassandra, I would leave a single item, a letter explaining my decision and the family photo from her college graduation that I had treasured for so many years. Nothing more. I want to give you some time to think about this, Robert said, as he walked me to the door. These kinds of decisions shouldn't be made in the heat of emotion or during a period of particular stress. Take a few weeks, maybe through the holidays, and make sure this feels right to you. We can always schedule another appointment in the new year if you want to proceed. I thanked him for his wisdom and his patience, but as I walked down Main Street toward my car, I already knew that my mind was made up. This wasn't a decision born out of temporary anger or hurt feelings. This was the culmination of years of accumulated disappointment, the recognition that enabling someone's selfishness is not the same thing as loving them. The holidays passed quietly that year. Cassandra called on Christmas Eve to apologize for not being able to visit, explaining that her new position required her to attend a series of client events during the week between Christmas and New Year's. The apology was familiar, delivered with the perfect combination of regret and justification that had become the soundtrack of our relationship. I know it's disappointing, Mom, but this is such a crucial time for establishing relationships with my new clients. David specifically asked me to handle the holiday entertainment calendar this year. It's a huge vote of confidence. I understand, I said, and for the first time in years, I genuinely did understand. I understood that she would always find reasons to prioritize other people and other obligations over spending time with me. I understood that her expressions of regret were designed to assuage her guilt rather than to actually change her behavior. And I understood that I had been complicit in this pattern by accepting her excuses and making my expectations so flexible that they essentially didn't exist. I'll make it up to you, she continued. Maybe we can plan a long weekend together, sometime in the spring when things settle down at work. Sometime in the spring when things settled down. I had heard variations of this promise dozens of times over the years, and I finally understood that sometime was a destination we would never reach because Cassandra would always find new reasons to postpone our plans. That sounds nice, I said, because there was no point in arguing or expressing disappointment. The time for those conversations had passed. I spent Christmas Day with Margaret and her family again, enjoying the warmth and chaos of a household where people chose to show up for each other consistently. Over dinner, Margaret's eldest granddaughter, a college sophomore studying social work, asked me about my volunteer work at the animal shelter. I'm thinking about doing some volunteer work myself, she said. Something that would give me experience, working with people who are going through difficult times. What made you choose the animal shelter? I found myself telling her about the months following my cancer treatment, when I had felt lost and purposeless, uncertain about how to rebuild my life around something other than worry about my daughter's well-being. The animal shelter had offered me a chance to provide comfort and care to creatures who needed it, to make a tangible difference in the world without expecting anything in return. The animals don't care about your past mistakes or your current limitations, I explained. They just care that you show up consistently and treat them with kindness. There's something very healing about that kind of uncomplicated relationship. The young woman listened thoughtfully, asking questions about my experiences and the various volunteer opportunities available. As we talked, I realized that I had found more genuine connection and purpose in my volunteer work than I had experienced. In years of trying to maintain a relationship with someone who consistently chose to be elsewhere. After dinner, as I helped clear the table, Margaret pulled me aside in the kitchen. You seem different this year, she said, her voice warm with concern. More settled somehow, like you've made peace with something that was troubling you. She was right, though I hadn't quite thought about it in those terms. I had made peace with something, with the reality of who my daughter had become, with the futility of hoping she would change, with the need to build a meaningful life that didn't depend on her approval or presence. I think I'm finally learning to stop waiting for other people to make my life fulfilling, I said. I'm learning to create my own happiness instead of depending on someone else to provide it. Margaret smiled and squeezed my hand. That's one of the hardest lessons to learn, but also one of the most important. Good for you. The new year arrived with unusual warmth for January, and with it came a sense of resolution that I hadn't expected. I called Robert Harrison's office and scheduled an appointment to finalize the changes to my estate plan. There was no more hesitation, no lingering doubt about the rightness of my decision. I had spent weeks thinking through the implications and consequences, and I remained convinced that this was the choice that best reflected my values and my understanding of what it meant to love someone responsibly. The second meeting with Robert was much shorter than the first. We reviewed the documents he had prepared based on our previous conversation, and I signed each page with steady hands and a clear conscience. My modest savings would fund scholarships for students like the young woman I had once been, hardworking, ambitious, but lacking the financial resources to pursue their dreams without help. The life insurance money would support the cancer center that had provided me with community during my darkest months. My personal possessions would go to the animal shelter, to be sold or used as needed to support their mission. For Cassandra, there would be only the letter I had spent weeks crafting and the graduation photo that had once represented all my hopes for her future. "Are you certain about this?" Robert asked one final time before we completed the process. "Once these documents are signed and notarized, this becomes your legal will. We can always modify it later if you change your mind, but I want to make sure you're comfortable with these decisions." "I'm certain," I said without hesitation. "This feels right. This feels like the legacy I want to leave." As I drove home from Robert's office that afternoon, I felt a profound sense of completion. For the first time in years, I had made a major decision based entirely on my own judgment and values, rather than on what I thought would make someone else happy. It was both liberating and terrifying to realize how rarely I had trusted my own instincts when it came to important choices. The next few months settled into a comfortable rhythm. I continued my volunteer work at the animal shelter, spending my mornings helping with feeding and cleaning, and my afternoons working on administrative tasks that utilized the organizational skills I had developed during my years in the workforce. The work was meaningful and immediately gratifying. When you helped heal a wounded animal or found a loving home for a stray dog, the impact was visible and undeniable. I also became more involved in the Cancer Support Center, attending monthly meetings where survivors shared their experiences and offered encouragement to people who were newly diagnosed. There was something powerful about being in a room full of people who understood fear and hope in equal measure, who had faced their own mortality and emerged with a deeper appreciation for the preciousness of ordinary moments. My relationship with Cassandra continued along its familiar pattern of infrequent phone calls and broken plans. She would call every few weeks with updates about her work and social life, asking polite questions about my health and activities, but never engaging deeply enough to recognize how much my daily existence had changed. When she occasionally suggested we get together, there was always a last-minute work crisis or social obligation that took precedence. I stopped making counter-suggestions or expressing disappointment. Instead, I simply agreed that we would try to coordinate something soon, and then went about living my life without factoring her presence into my plans. The shift was subtle but significant. I was no longer organizing my schedule around the possibility that she might visit, no longer keeping weekends open in case she wanted to spend time together. Spring arrived early that year, with daffodils blooming in March and trees budding weeks ahead of their normal schedule. I spent long hours working in the small garden behind my apartment building, preparing new beds and planning the layout for the growing season ahead. Gardening had become a form of meditation for me, a way of connecting with the natural cycles of growth and renewal that reminded me that endings were often followed by new beginnings. It was during one of these gardening sessions that I noticed the return of a familiar pain, a dull ache in my lower back that I initially attributed to too much bending and digging. But as the days passed, the pain intensified and began to radiate down my leg in a way that suggested something more serious than simple muscle strain. I made an appointment with Dr. Martinez, my primary care physician, who conducted a thorough examination and ordered a series of tests. The waiting period that followed was achingly familiar. The anxious days between testing and results, the careful management of hope and fear, the awareness that life could change direction with a single phone call. When Dr. Martinez called with the results, his voice was gentle but serious. The pain was being caused by several small masses pressing against my spine. The cancer had returned, but this time it had metastasized to my bones. The prognosis was not good. Months rather than years. Palliative care rather than curative treatment. I sat in my kitchen after receiving the news, staring out the window at the garden I had been planning with such optimism just days earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent months making peace with my relationship with Cassandra and planning a legacy that reflected my values, only to discover that I would have much less time than I had expected to enjoy the freedom that came with those decisions. But I wasn't afraid. After facing cancer once and surviving it alone, after rebuilding my life around my own interests and relationships rather than waiting for someone else to prioritize me, I felt remarkably calm. About this latest development, I had already learned how to live fully in the present moment. I had already discovered that contentment came from within rather than from external validation. I had already made my peace with the people and circumstances that had shaped my life. Most importantly, I had already ensured that my legacy would reflect my values rather than my desperate hope that love alone could inspire loyalty. I decided not to tell Cassandra about the diagnosis immediately. There would be time for those conversations later, when decisions needed to be made about treatment options and end-of-life care. For now, I wanted to sit with the knowledge privately, to process it on my own terms without feeling obligated to manage someone else's emotional response. Instead, I called Margaret and asked if she would like to take a longer hike than usual that weekend, perhaps exploring one of the more challenging trails in the state park. She agreed immediately, and we spent Saturday morning climbing through the woods as spring flowers bloomed along the pathways and birds returned from their winter migrations. "You know," Margaret said as we paused to rest on a rocky outcrop with a view of the valley below, "I've always admired how you've handled the challenges life has thrown at you. You have a kind of quiet strength that I find really inspiring." I thanked her for the compliment, but I found myself thinking about the word strength and what it really meant. For most of my life, I had thought strength meant enduring whatever circumstances presented themselves, accepting disappointment and neglect as unavoidable aspects of loving other people. I had confused endurance with wisdom, patience with self-respect. Now I understood that real strength sometimes meant saying no, setting boundaries, refusing to accept treatment that diminished your dignity or well-being. Real strength meant making decisions based on your own values rather than your fear of losing relationships that might not be worth preserving. As we made our way back down the mountain, I felt grateful for the time I had remaining, however long or short it might be. I had used the months since my estate planning appointment well, deepening friendships that were based on mutual respect and shared interests rather than obligation or need. I had found meaningful work that made use of my skills and provided tangible benefits to others. I had learned to take pleasure in simple things: a perfectly brewed cup of tea, the satisfaction of completing a challenging watercolor painting, the quiet companionship of animals who asked for nothing more than consistent kindness. These were the gifts I would carry with me through whatever lay ahead. These were the memories that would sustain me during the difficult months to come. And these were the experiences that confirmed I had made the right choice about my legacy, directing my resources toward people and organizations that understood the value of showing up consistently for others rather than leaving everything. To someone who had demonstrated through her actions that my well-being was always secondary to her other priorities. That evening, I sat down at my kitchen table and began writing a letter to Cassandra, not the formal document that would accompany my will, but a personal message that explained my decision in terms that emphasized love rather than disappointment, wisdom rather than punishment. It was important to me that she understand this choice wasn't made out of anger or resentment, but out of a hard-won understanding of what it meant to love someone responsibly. The letter took several drafts and many days to complete. I wanted to strike the right tone, honest but not cruel, clear but not accusatory. I wanted her to understand that my decision reflected my values and experiences rather than a rejection of her as a person. Most importantly, I wanted her to learn from my choice rather than simply feeling hurt by it. As I worked on the letter, I found myself thinking about the young woman Cassandra had been when she left for college. Bright, ambitious, full of dreams and determination. That young woman had possessed qualities I still admired, even if they had been complicated over the years by experiences and choices that had led her away from the values I had tried to teach her. Perhaps someday, I thought, she would rediscover those qualities. Perhaps the shock of learning about my death and my final decision would prompt her to examine her priorities and relationships with more honesty than she had shown in recent years. Perhaps she would choose to honor my memory by becoming the kind of person who showed up for others during their times of need, rather than finding excuses to prioritize her own comfort and advancement. I couldn't control whether that transformation would occur. I could only control my own choices and ensure that my final act as her mother was one that reflected my deepest values rather than my deepest fears. The letter, when finally completed, filled 3 pages of my careful handwriting. It explained my decision without dwelling on specific instances of her absence or neglect. It acknowledged the love and pride I had always felt for her accomplishments, while also expressing my hope that she would learn to balance professional success with personal responsibility. It outlined my wishes for the future she would build without me, emphasizing the importance of showing up for the people who mattered to her and creating relationships based on mutual care rather than convenience. Most importantly, it released her from any obligation to feel guilty about my choice. I made it clear that this decision was mine alone, based on my own understanding of what constituted a meaningful legacy. I didn't want her to spend years torturing herself with regret, or wondering if there was something she could have done differently to change my mind. I sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it with the copy of my will that I kept in my personal files. When the time came, Robert Harrison would ensure that she received both documents along with the graduation photo that would serve as her sole inheritance. As spring turned to summer, I continued living my life with the same purposefulness that had characterized the months following my estate planning decision. I attended hiking group outings when my energy allowed, continued my volunteer work at the animal shelter on days when the pain was manageable, and maintained my regular participation in the cancer support group meetings. The other members of the support group became a source of strength and wisdom as I navigated the challenges of my prognosis. Many of them had faced similar journeys, and they offered practical advice about pain management and emotional preparation, alongside the kind of deep understanding that can only come from shared experience. During one particularly meaningful meeting, a woman named Claire, who was in the final stages of her own battle, spoke about the importance of making peace with your relationships while you still had time. I spent too many years waiting for other people to become who I needed them to be, she said, her voice weak but clear. I finally realized that was my mistake, not theirs. Once I accepted people as they actually were instead of who I hoped they might become, I was able to make decisions that reflected reality rather than wishful thinking. Her words resonated deeply with me because they captured exactly what I had discovered about my relationship with Cassandra. I had spent years hoping she would become more attentive, more present, more willing to prioritize our relationship over her professional obligations. But hoping for someone to change was not the same thing as loving them, and making decisions based on who they might become rather than who they actually were led only to disappointment and resentment. By accepting Cassandra as she was, ambitious, successful, but ultimately someone who would always find reasons to prioritize her own needs over mine, I had been able to make choices that protected my own dignity and reflected my own values. The peace that came with that acceptance was worth more than any inheritance I might have left her. As summer progressed, my condition began to deteriorate more rapidly. The pain became harder to manage, and I found myself sleeping more and eating less. Dr. Martinez referred me to a hospice program that provided both medical support and emotional counseling designed to help patients and families navigate the final stages of terminal illness. The hospice team was compassionate and professional, helping me understand what to expect in the coming months and connecting me with resources that would make the process as comfortable as possible. They also gently encouraged me to have important conversations with family members while I was still feeling relatively well. It was time, I realized, to tell Cassandra about my diagnosis. I called her on a Tuesday evening when I knew she would likely be home from work but not yet involved in social plans. She answered on the third ring, her voice cheerful and relaxed in a way that suggested she had been having a good day. "Hi, Mom. Perfect timing. I just opened a bottle of wine and was settling in to catch up on some reading. How are you?" "I'm okay," I said, though we both knew that my definition of okay had become more flexible over the past few months. "I actually called because I have something I need to tell you. Something important." The tone of my voice must have alerted her that this wasn't a routine social call because I heard her moving, perhaps setting down her wine glass or closing her book. "What is it? Are you feeling all right?" "I went to see Dr. Martinez a few weeks ago about some back pain I'd been having," I began carefully. "It turns out the cancer has returned. It's metastasized to my bones, and the prognosis isn't good." Silence stretched between us for several seconds. Then I heard her sharp intake of breath followed by what might have been the sound of crying, though she was trying to muffle it. "Oh, Mom. Oh, no. How long? What did the doctors say?" I explained what Dr. Martinez and the hospice team had told me about the likely timeline and the palliative care options available. She listened without interrupting, asking occasional questions about pain management and treatment possibilities. "I'll drive up this weekend," she said when I finished explaining the situation. "We need to talk about this in person. We need to make plans." For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old hope that maybe this crisis would finally prompt her to prioritize our relationship, to recognize what was truly important before it was too late. But then I reminded myself that accepting people as they were meant not expecting them to fundamentally change, even in the face of extreme circumstances. "That would be nice," I said simply. "But don't feel like you need to disrupt your schedule. I'm managing well with the support I have here." "Mom, of course I'm going to disrupt my schedule. This is important. This is—" She paused, searching for words. "This is more important than anything else." The weekend visit did materialize, marking the first time Cassandra had been to Millbrook in over a year. She arrived Friday evening, looking slightly harried from the drive and the emotional weight of our phone conversation. I had prepared a simple dinner of soup and sandwiches, not sure how much energy I would have for cooking or how long my appetite would hold up during difficult conversations. We spent the evening talking about practical matters, my medical care, the hospice program, my preferences for the months ahead. She took notes on everything, asking detailed questions about my doctors and medications with the same efficiency she probably brought to her professional responsibilities. What she didn't ask about, and what I didn't volunteer, was my estate planning. The will I had signed months earlier remained my secret, locked away with Robert Harrison and the letter that would explain my reasoning to her after I was gone. On Saturday morning, we took a short walk around the neighborhood where I had lived for so many years. The summer heat was already building, but the tree-lined streets provided enough shade to make the exercise comfortable. Cassandra seemed to be seeing the area with fresh eyes, commenting on the well-maintained houses and friendly neighbors who waved as we passed. "It's really beautiful here," she said as we paused in front of the small park where she had played as a child. "I forget sometimes how peaceful small towns can be." I nodded, thinking about all the life that had unfolded in these familiar streets. Her childhood, my working years, the long process of learning to build a meaningful existence after she moved away. This place had been the backdrop for every significant relationship and experience of my adult life. "I've been happy here," I said simply. "It's been a good place to build a life." We spent the rest of the weekend in gentle conversation, avoiding the most difficult topics while still acknowledging the reality of what lay ahead. She helped me organize some of my personal papers and contact information, making sure she would be able to reach my doctors and support network when needed. She also insisted on cooking Sunday dinner, preparing a meal elaborate enough to provide leftovers for several days. As she prepared to leave Sunday evening, she hugged me more tightly than she had in years. "I love you, Mom," she said, and I could hear the tears she was trying not to shed. "I'm going to do better about staying in touch, about visiting more often. I promise." I hugged her back, memorizing the feel of holding my daughter close one final time. "I love you too, sweetheart. I'm proud of everything you've accomplished." I didn't respond to her promise about doing better, because we both knew that such promises had been made and broken many times before. Instead, I chose to focus on the love that had never been in question, even when her priorities had disappointed me. After she left, I returned to my routine of volunteer work and social activities, living each day with the awareness that my time was limited, but not allowing that knowledge to overshadow the satisfaction I found in simple pleasures and meaningful relationships. The end, when it came, would be peaceful. But first, there would be one final act of love disguised as justice, one last lesson delivered with the quiet strength that had sustained me through decades of giving everything I had to someone who had never learned to give back. The months following Cassandra's visit settled into a strange rhythm of decline, punctuated by moments of unexpected grace. My body was weakening steadily, but my spirit felt stronger than it had in years. There was something profoundly liberating about knowing exactly how much time you had left and choosing to spend it on your own terms, rather than waiting for other people to decide you were worth their attention. The hospice team had become an essential part of my daily life, visiting twice a week to monitor my pain levels and adjust medications as needed. Sarah, my primary nurse, was a woman in her 40s with gentle hands and an intuitive understanding of what dying people needed most. Not false optimism or medical miracles, but honest companionship and respect for the choices they made about their final months. "You're handling this with remarkable grace," she told me during one of her visits in early August. "Many people in your situation spend their energy fighting the inevitable or trying to control everyone around them. You seem to have found a different path." I was sitting in my favorite chair by the window, watching the morning sun filter through the leaves of the old maple tree that shaded my apartment building. The pain medication made everything feel slightly soft around the edges, but it also created a kind of peaceful distance from the urgency that had driven so much of my earlier life. "I think I've finally learned the difference between things I can control and things I can't," I replied. "I can't control how much time I have left, or whether my daughter chooses to prioritize me over her other obligations, but I can control how I spend my remaining time and who I spend it with." The third week of September brought a phone call that I had been expecting but dreading. Cassandra called on a Tuesday evening, her voice tight with stress and excitement, as she delivered the news that her promotion to regional director had been approved. "They want me to start immediately," she said, words tumbling over each other in her rush to share the details. "I'll need to be in Atlanta by the 1st of October to begin the transition process. It's going to be incredibly demanding for the first few months, but this is exactly the opportunity I've been working toward my entire career." I congratulated her warmly, and my pride in her accomplishment was genuine. She had overcome significant obstacles to reach this level of professional success, and she deserved to feel proud of what she had achieved through years of hard work and dedication. "The timing is terrible, of course," she continued, and I could hear her moving around what was probably her apartment, perhaps already beginning to pack for the move. I wanted to spend more time with you before. She paused, unable to complete the sentence that acknowledged my approaching death. I understand, I said gently. This is an important opportunity for you. You need to take it. But I feel awful about the timing. I promised I would be more present, more available, and now I'm moving even further away just when you need me most. Her guilt was audible, and I found myself in the familiar position of comforting her about a choice that left me more isolated than ever. It was a pattern that had defined our relationship for years, her making decisions based on her own priorities, and then seeking absolution from me for the consequences those decisions had on my well-being. Sweetheart, I said, drawing on reserves of maternal grace I hadn't known I still possessed. I want you to take this job and build the life you've dreamed of. Don't let worry about me hold you back from pursuing your goals. October arrived, with an early cold snap that seemed to accelerate the progression of my illness. The hospice team increased their visits to daily check-ins, and Sarah began preparing me for the final stages of the dying process with the gentle honesty that had characterized all our interactions. Margaret had organized an informal schedule among my local friends, ensuring that someone visited every day to help with meals and housekeeping and to provide companionship during the long afternoon hours when the pain medication made it difficult to concentrate on reading or other activities. These women, most of whom I had known for less than 2 years, were demonstrating the kind of consistent care and attention that I had hoped to receive from my daughter, but had learned not to expect. November brought the first snow of the winter, and with it a noticeable decline in my physical condition. I was spending most of my time sleeping now, with brief periods of wakefulness for meals and visits from friends. The hospice team had moved a hospital bed into my living room so I could remain part of the household activity while receiving the care I needed. The Thanksgiving holiday passed quietly, with Margaret and several other friends gathering in my living room for a simple meal and heartfelt conversation. Cassandra called that evening to apologize for missing another holiday, explaining that her new position required her to attend a major industry conference that weekend. I miss you, Mom, she said toward the end of our conversation. I know. I haven't been there the way I should have been, but I want you to know that I think about you all the time. December arrived with an early blizzard that created the kind of winter wonderland that made everything look clean and peaceful. My condition was deteriorating rapidly now, and Sarah had begun preparing my friends for the likelihood that I would die within the next few weeks. Margaret had essentially moved into my apartment, sleeping on the couch and providing round-the-clock companionship that ensured I was never alone during the difficult night hours when pain and fear could overwhelm the medication's ability to provide comfort. The second week of December brought what would be my final conversation with Cassandra. She called on a Wednesday evening, her voice tight with stress and fatigue as she described the challenges of her new position. Mom, you sound awful. Are you? How much time do the doctors think you have left? Not long, I said honestly. Weeks, maybe days. It's hard to predict exactly. I need to come see you, she said finally. This weekend. I don't care what meetings I have to cancel or what clients get angry. This is more important than any of that. But Friday brought a phone call I had learned to expect. A major client crisis had erupted overnight, Cassandra explained, something that required her immediate attention and presence at an emergency meeting with the company's senior leadership. I tried everything I could think of to get out of it, she said, her voice thick with tears and frustration. But if I don't handle this personally, it could destroy everything I've worked for in this position. I understand, I said, though the words came out as barely more than a whisper. I'll come next weekend instead. I promise. Nothing will keep me from being there next weekend. But we both knew that next weekend might be too late. I died on a Tuesday morning in mid-December, with Margaret holding my hand and Sarah monitoring my breathing. The end came peacefully, exactly as I had hoped, surrounded by people who had chosen to show up for me consistently, people who understood, That presence during difficult times was both a privilege and a responsibility. Margaret later told me that Cassandra had called that afternoon, frantically trying to reach me after receiving a message from the hospice team. She had been in meetings all morning, her phone set to silent, completely unaware that her mother was spending her final hours calling out for her daughter who would never come. The funeral arrangements proceeded exactly as I had planned. Margaret handled the coordination with quiet efficiency, ensuring that the service reflected my preferences for simplicity and meaning rather than empty ritual. The small chapel was filled with friends from my hiking group, volunteers from the animal shelter, members of my book club, and fellow survivors from the cancer support group. These were the people who had chosen to make my life richer through their presence and care. Cassandra arrived the night before the service, having driven straight from Atlanta after receiving the news of my death. Margaret described her as devastated and guilt-ridden, alternating between tears and angry outbursts about why no one had called her sooner, why she hadn't been given more warning about how quickly my condition was deteriorating. She kept saying she should have been here, Margaret told me later. She kept asking why you didn't make her understand how urgent the situation was. But I had understood, even in my final weeks, that some lessons can only be learned through consequences rather than warnings. Cassandra had made her choices consistently for years, prioritizing her career and personal comfort over being present during my times of need. No amount of explanation or pleading would have changed that pattern. Only the reality of losing me completely, of facing the fact that she had chosen work obligations over being with her dying mother, could teach her what her priorities had actually cost. The reading of my will took place 3 days after the funeral, in Robert Harrison's office on a gray winter morning when the world outside looked as somber as the occasion demanded. Cassandra sat across from Robert's desk, wearing the same black dress she had worn to my funeral, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, and her hands shaking slightly as she waited to learn about the inheritance she had undoubtedly been counting on, to ease the financial burden of her new life in Atlanta. The conference room next door held 23 other people, representatives from the cancer center, the animal shelter, and the scholarship fund that would receive the bulk of my estate. But Cassandra knew nothing about their presence. She assumed this meeting was about her inheritance, about the modest wealth I had accumulated over a lifetime of careful saving and sacrifice. Robert had prepared her gently for the fact that my estate plan included charitable donations, explaining that many people choose to leave portions of their assets to causes they cared about. Cassandra had nodded impatiently, clearly assuming that these bequests would be small token amounts that wouldn't significantly impact her inheritance. "Now then," Robert said, opening my file and adjusting his reading glasses. "Let me go through the specific provisions of your mother's will." He began with the charitable bequests, reading each one aloud with the precise legal language that made formal documents sound both important and impersonal. $20,000 to the Cancer Support Center where I had found community during my treatment. $15,000 to the animal shelter where I had volunteered. $25,000 to establish a scholarship fund for first-generation college students from working-class families. Cassandra listened to each bequest with growing confusion, her eyes widening as she realized the scope of what I had given away. $60,000, nearly 3/4 of my total savings, directed to organizations rather than to her. "I don't understand," she said when Robert paused in his reading. That's almost everything. What's left for me?" Robert's expression remained professionally neutral, but I could imagine the sadness he felt as he prepared to deliver the news that would change everything Cassandra thought she knew about our relationship and my final judgment of her choices. "According to your mother's will," he said gently, "you are to receive one item from her personal effects, a photograph from your college graduation, along with a letter she wrote specifically for you." The silence that followed was so complete that Robert later said he could hear the heating system cycling on in the building's basement. Cassandra stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language, her mind clearly struggling to process what she had just heard. "That's it?" she finally whispered. "A photograph and a letter? Nothing else?" "Nothing else," Robert confirmed. But I'm her daughter. I'm her only child. How can she leave everything to strangers and give me nothing?" Robert had handled difficult estate readings before, and he had learned to remain calm and compassionate even when delivering news that devastated the people sitting across from his desk. "Your mother spent considerable time thinking about this decision," he said. "The letter she wrote for you explains her reasoning. Perhaps you should read it before drawing any conclusions about her motivations." He handed her the sealed envelope that contained the 3 pages I had labored over for weeks, choosing each word carefully to convey love rather than punishment, wisdom rather than cruelty. Cassandra took the envelope with trembling hands, staring at her name written in my familiar handwriting. "Would you like me to give you some privacy to read this?" Robert asked. Cassandra shook her head, her face pale but determined. "No, I want to read it now. I need to understand what she was thinking." She opened the envelope carefully, as if it might contain something dangerous, and unfolded the pages with the same precision she probably brought to important business documents. As she began to read, Robert later told Margaret, her expression shifted from confusion to recognition to something that might have been understanding. "My letter began with an affirmation of my love for her and my pride in her accomplishments, acknowledging the intelligence and determination that had carried her from a small-town childhood to professional success in a competitive field. I wanted her to know that my decision wasn't born out of anger or resentment, but out of a hard-won understanding of what it meant to love someone responsibly. I wrote about the years of her childhood when I had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities I had never had, working multiple jobs and living on virtually nothing, so she could have piano lessons and summer camps, and the college education that opened doors to a life I could barely imagine. I reminded her of the nights I had spent helping with homework, the weekends I had driven her to activities and competitions, the countless ways I had demonstrated that her well-being and happiness were my highest priorities. Then I wrote about the years that followed, when the pattern of our relationship had gradually reversed itself. I described my cancer diagnosis and treatment, the months of chemotherapy I had endured alone while she attended work conferences and client dinners. I wrote about the follow-up appointments she had missed, the holidays she had skipped, the consistent choice to prioritize her career advancement over spending time with me. I explained that I had finally learned the difference between loving someone and enabling them to take that love for granted. I wrote about discovering that real love sometimes meant refusing to reward behavior that demonstrated a fundamental lack of reciprocal care and commitment. "I am not punishing you," I had written in careful script. "I am choosing to direct my resources toward people and organizations that have demonstrated through their actions that they understand the value of showing up for others during times of need. I hope that someday you will understand that this decision reflects my love for you, not my disappointment in you." The letter concluded with my hopes for her future, that she would learn to balance professional success with personal relationships, that she would discover the joy of being truly present for people who mattered to her, that she would find the kind of love that was based on mutual care rather than convenience. "You have everything you need to build a meaningful life," I had written. "You have intelligence, education, professional success, and opportunities I could never have imagined when I was your age. What you need to learn is how to love fully and consistently, how to show up for others the way they have shown up for you. I hope that losing me will teach you what having me should have meant." Cassandra read the entire letter twice before setting it down on Robert's desk. Her face was streaked with tears, but her expression had changed from shock and anger to something deeper and more complex. Grief mixed with recognition, love complicated by regret. "She's right," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "About all of it. I was a terrible daughter." Robert, who had witnessed many such moments of reckoning over the years, spoke gently. Your mother didn't think you were terrible. She thought you were someone who needed to learn a difficult lesson about what matters most in life. But it's too late now. I can't make it up to her. I can't change any of the choices I made. No, Robert agreed. But you can change the choices you make going forward. You can honor her memory by becoming the kind of person she hoped you would become. Cassandra sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the letter and the photograph that represented her entire inheritance from a mother who had given her everything for the first 18 years of her life and asked for very little in return during the 20 years that followed. The organizations that received her money, she said eventually. Can you tell me about them? Robert explained about the cancer center where I had found community during my treatment, the animal shelter where I had volunteered my time and energy, the scholarship fund that would help students like the young woman I had once been pursue educational opportunities despite financial limitations. These were the places where your mother found meaning and purpose during her final years, he said. These were the people and causes that demonstrated the kind of consistent care and commitment she valued most. Cassandra nodded slowly, and Robert could see her beginning to understand that my bequests weren't arbitrary donations to random charities, but careful investments in the values and relationships that had sustained me when she had chosen to be absent. I want to visit them, she said suddenly. The cancer center and the animal shelter. I want to see what mattered to her, what she found there that she couldn't find with me. Over the following weeks, Cassandra did exactly that. She drove to the cancer center and met with the staff who remembered me from the support group meetings. Listening to stories about my participation in their community and my dedication to helping newly diagnosed patients navigate their fear and uncertainty, she volunteered at the animal shelter for an entire weekend, learning about the work I had done and meeting animals who had benefited from my care. Most meaningfully, she spent an afternoon with Margaret, asking questions about our friendship and the way I had spent my final months. Margaret was generous in her responses, sharing stories about our hiking adventures and book club discussions, describing the network of relationships I had built around shared interests and mutual support. Your mother was lonely for a long time, Margaret told her as they sat in my empty apartment, surrounded by the belongings that would soon be donated or discarded. She missed you terribly, but she gradually learned to build a life that didn't depend on your presence or approval. She found joy and purpose that came from within herself and from relationships with people who chose to prioritize her well-being. I should have been one of those people, Cassandra said, her voice thick with regret. Yes, Margaret agreed, simply. You should have been. But she didn't make this decision to hurt you. She made it to teach you something important about love and responsibility. 3 months after my death, Cassandra made a decision that would have filled me with pride if I had been alive to witness it. She resigned from her position as regional director, giving up the promotion she had worked toward for years, and the salary that had required her to prioritize work above all other considerations. Instead, she took a position with a nonprofit organization that provided support services to families dealing with terminal illness. The salary was a fraction of what she had been earning in corporate marketing, but the work allowed her to be present for people during their most vulnerable moments, to demonstrate the kind of consistent care and commitment she had never learned to offer me. She also established a tradition of visiting my grave every month, bringing fresh flowers and sitting quietly among the memories of our complicated relationship. Sometimes she brought letters she had written to me, reading them aloud as if I could hear her words of apology and understanding. Sometimes she simply sat in silence, processing the grief and regret that would be her companions for years to come. Margaret told me later that Cassandra had become a different person in the months following my death. Quieter, more thoughtful, more attuned to the needs of others around her. She began volunteering regularly at both the cancer center and the animal shelter, contributing not just money but time and emotional energy to the causes I had supported. She also developed meaningful relationships with people who shared her new understanding of what mattered most in life. She dated occasionally, but she no longer pursued relationships based on convenience or status. Instead, she looked for partners who demonstrated through their actions that they understood the importance of showing up consistently for the people they claimed to love. Years later, when she married a social worker who shared her commitment to service and presence, she kept my graduation photo on her mantle alongside her wedding pictures. She would tell visitors that it reminded her of the mother who had loved her enough to teach her a difficult lesson about the true meaning of love and loyalty. The Cancer Center used my bequest to expand their support group programming, helping hundreds of patients find the kind of community I had discovered during my own treatment. The animal shelter built a new wing that they named in my honor, creating space for additional animals to receive care while waiting for loving homes. The scholarship fund grew beyond my initial contribution, eventually helping dozens of first-generation college students pursue their educational dreams without the financial burden that had limited my own opportunities. Each recipient received not just monetary support, but also mentoring and encouragement designed to help them navigate the challenges of being the first in their families to pursue higher education. These legacies felt more meaningful to me than any inheritance I could have left to a daughter who had demonstrated through her choices that career advancement would always take precedence over family relationships. My money was creating positive change in the world, supporting people and causes that embodied the values I had tried to live by during my final years. But perhaps the most important legacy was the transformation that occurred in Cassandra herself. My decision to disinherit her financially had ultimately enriched her emotionally and spiritually, teaching her lessons about love and presence that no amount of money could have provided. She learned that real success wasn't measured by salary or status, but by the depth and authenticity of your relationships with others. She discovered that showing up consistently for people during their times of need was both a privilege and a responsibility. She understood, finally, that love without reciprocity wasn't actually love at all, but a form of emotional manipulation that benefited no one. Most importantly, she learned to honor my memory not by mourning what she had lost through her own choices, but by becoming the kind of person I had always hoped she would become. Someone who understood that the most valuable inheritance anyone can leave is the example of how to love fully, consistently, and courageously. The will reading that had initially devastated her became the catalyst for a transformation that touched every aspect of her life. In choosing to leave her materially empty-handed, I had given her the opportunity to discover the riches that came from emotional generosity and spiritual growth. It was, I realized from whatever perspective death had granted me, the most loving thing I could have done for a daughter who needed to learn that some gifts can only be received by those who have first learned how to give. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.